Okay, so our district mission, I don't believe in mission statements really. When I started at Fremont High School, our staff spent 2 days going over, like building a mission statement that then was laminated and posted in every room and never talked about again. And I calculated, 80 teachers, we all got paid $200 a day for 2 days. It was a tremendous amount of money that was spent to put something on a wall. It was grammatically incorrect, I thought, and just kind of confusing. And I remember we spent probably 2 or 3 hours debating whether the word joyful should be in the mission statement. And we had this consensus model where any person could say, I cannot move on, and it would stop. And so there were 2 people, one who said, I cannot have the word joyful in the mission statement, and another person who said, I cannot have it out of the mission statement. And 80 of us sat there grinding through what joyful meant and whether it should be, part of our mission or not. And it drove me absolutely crazy. It actually didn't end up in the mission statement, although I think there was a lot of joy in our classrooms. And so I was really skeptical. This, however, is different. This was much more of an organic document, and it came out of the work that's embodied in this document had been happening for several years. And it was 2 years ago at an administrative retreat when the board member said, what can our board do to support you in this work? And somebody said, we need this codified. We need somebody to just stand up and say, this is what we believe in and this is what we're trying to do. And so over the course of that year, our deputy superintendent for teaching and learning drafted it, sent it through many rounds of revisions through different people and leaders, and came up with this document. And when we read it, we're like, yeah, that's us. This isn't a mission that we set up and then we tried to meet. This is what we're doing, and it really, I think, says what we're all about. And so I wanted to share it with you because I think it's an important document. And I want to focus on, I think it's on the first, it's actually on the back page, kind of, where it starts. And the first sentence says, the Fremont Union High School District hires and supports teachers, staff, and school leaders who believe that all students can achieve at high levels. Now, this is a term that's thrown around a lot. All kids can learn. And it's thrown around in a way that I think is a little cavalier, and so I want to make sure that we're clear about what we mean by this. Well, we know that all students don't achieve at high levels. That's clear. You can look at any grade book and see that not all students are meeting the standards. So what we're saying is there are many, many, many reasons why a particular student isn't meeting the standards and isn't achieving at high levels. There's one reason that we will take off the table, which is that that student doesn't have the brain capacity, doesn't have the gray matter, the physical ability inside their brain to achieve at high levels. Now, of course, there are some students in our special ed program that this isn't entirely true for. There's the 1% or 2% on each end of the spectrum that maybe can't do calculus or something like that. But the more that we believe that of all of the problems that this kid faces, it's not something kind of in the internal circuitry of their brain. That's not the problem. It changes the way that we address problems, and I believe it really promotes an optimistic attitude about what we can do and about our power as teachers to change the lives of kids. However, it's not happening, right? Not all kids are achieving at high levels. And so therefore, the second part of this is we are therefore committed to, since we're not getting it yet, we haven't figured out how to get all kids at the highest level, we need to continuously improve. And I heard that from some of you as you talked about why you're coming to this district. It's a great place for collaboration. It's a great place for growth. We all know that we can get better at our jobs, and we're dedicated to doing so because if kids can all achieve at high levels and they're not, then it's our job to make it so. And so that's kind of a foundation. And then if you look at the rest of the document, it's all talking about how we're going to do that and what teachers need to agree to and what the leaders need to agree to in order to support teachers in doing so. So that brings us to this first basic question, which is, what is intelligence? How does intelligence work? And so we set it up in kind of a binary question. It's really more of a spectrum, but we're trying to simplify it. So we say, which do you believe in more? Do you believe that your intelligence is something very basic about you that you can't change very much? Or do you believe that no matter how much intelligence you currently have, you can always change it quite a bit? Or another way to look at this is, you can learn new things, but you can't change how intelligent you are, or you can always change substantially change how intelligent you are. So numbers 1, your intelligence, something basic about you can't change, and 3 are the same, right? And 2 and 4 are the same as well. So Carol Dweck, who's the psychologist that I referenced, wrote a book, I think it was published in 2007, called Mindset. If you haven't read it, I highly, highly recommend it. As a parent, I read it when my oldest was 1 year old, and it radically changed the way that I look at parenting, and I'll share a little bit more about that later. But as a teacher, it was great, but for me, parenting is my most important job, and it drastically altered the way that I parent, I think, for the better, not only for my own kind of mental health, but also for my kids and for their development. So a lot of the work that we're talking about today is based on her research. And what she basically says is there's 2 types of people: those who have a fixed mindset and those who have a growth mindset. Fixed mindset are the people that believe in statements 1 and 3, that intelligence is fixed, and people with a growth mindset believe that intelligence can change over time. So when we share this with our students, we typically use this metaphor, which is a fixed mindset is thinking about the brain as a brick. It's static. It doesn't change. And a growth mindset believes the brain is more like a plant, and if it's given carbon dioxide and sunlight and water and fertilizer, that it can grow. And if it's not given those things, that it can atrophy or shrink. So coming back to this question, I'm going to ask you to kind of think about this and talk with the people at your table about it. But I want to make sure that we're kind of at the same level of scope in terms of what we're talking about for intelligence. So first of all, some people talk about intelligence as you could have book smarts or street smarts, and both of those are forms of intelligence. However you want to define those is up to you, I guess. Some people think of math versus English, like I'm math smart, but I'm not an English person. Or even, we're going to expand the definitions to say something like artistic ability or athletic talent. We know that athletes, like their brain is what's controlling the muscles, and so therefore it's intelligence that allows athletes to achieve at such high levels. And then we're actually going to even expand it more to personality traits, something like being organized, or even something like being motivated or lazy. Those are aspects of intelligence, as it's your brain that's helping you to do all of these different things. So when we look at this expanded view, a lot of people go to Howard Gardner and his theory of multiple intelligences. As a side note, I just read this really interesting article by him where he said that people conflate learning styles with intelligences to the detriment of students, and that saying that somebody is an auditory learner and that's the way that they learn, or a visual learner, and they can't learn through auditory, is actually not scientifically proven, doesn't have anything to do with what Howard Gardner was talking about. And even though educators have been using it for years, some argue it can really harm students in ways, especially because it is aligned a little bit with a fixed mindset in terms of the way that people learn. But in terms of the multiple intelligences, you see in the upper right quadrant, those are kind of the school smart SAT style intelligences, linguistic and logical and math. Intrapersonal and intrapersonal have to do with like, oh, he's a people person. Or I think of like George W. Bush as, if you're going to call him really intelligent, it's in that people smarts realm that he really excels in his intelligence, when maybe not in the linguistic or logic ones necessarily. Not saying anything political here, I'm just trying to give a description. And then we have music smart and body smart, which are more, some people don't consider those intelligences, although, as I said, the brain is what's controlling those. And then picture smart or spatial intelligence and nature smart. So what I'd like you to do, first, just for about 30 seconds, just on your own thinking, which of these 8 do you consider your strengths? And which ones do you consider your weaknesses? And then I want you to ponder, which of these intelligences do you think is more malleable or changeable, and which do you think is more kind of fixed or static? So I'm going to give you about 30 seconds to think by yourself, and then I'll have you share with partners. Okay. So sometimes people describe this as the nature versus nurture debate, with nature as being the fixed mindset and nurture being growth mindset. And so I wanted to just take a second to talk about the fixed mindset. I mentioned it just a moment ago. It is pervasive. It is pervasive in our culture. You see it in the way that we idolize athletes as being gifted. Actually, in schools, we have gifted and talented programs, like this person's intelligence was a gift given to them at birth, and that they, didn't do anything to earn it. You see it in magazines. It's just everywhere. The reason that her book was so impactful on me is because as soon as I read it, I started hearing in my own words, even though I thought I had a growth mindset, I was using language to my kids, like saying, wow, you're so smart. Like, that is a fixed mindset statement, that you are smart. Like, it's something about you, not that doing that problem so well shows, real perseverance or something like that. So the way that we all talk shows that the fixed mindset is totally embedded in our culture and has been for years and years. The IQ test that was invented about 100 years ago embodies this belief that intelligence is innate, you're born with it, it's measurable, and it doesn't change, and it's testable. So this IQ curve shows that 70% of people are average, and then you have the 0.13% that are exceptionally gifted. It even has the word gifted here. And then the 2.3% that are mentally inadequate. And this is, if you're a special ed teacher, when we started doing this, our special ed teachers really struggled because the IEP and everything in special ed is built on the IQ test and is built on this idea that certain kids have these disabilities that are fixed as a part of their brain and can't change. And so we struggle as a district and as leaders to help, especially teachers that are working with that population, to understand what can change and how our beliefs impact that. If you look at there's the standardized tests, of course. If you look at pop culture, something like Tiger Woods, who has obviously some personality traits that aren't as maybe gifted as people think, but his golf, he played golf from the age of 3, and when he was that young, he could hit the ball further than I can. Like, he definitely had some natural talents, but he also worked very, very, very hard to get there. And if you talk to any professional athlete, the way that they talk about their effort, none of them believe that they just had this gift that was given to them that allows them to achieve at that level. Even people like Bill Gates, if you read, Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers, which talked about Bill Gates was the only 8th grader in the country in whenever it was, the late 70s, whose middle school had a computer like that kids could use. And so there were other kids in his school, and his parents worked at UW, and he had access to the mainframe computers after hours, and so he put in thousands and thousands of hours on a computer when other kids had no access to it. So he wasn't born a genius that could, create all of these computer systems. He had some natural talent, of course, but he also had these circumstances that really pushed him over the edge. And then something like Jim Carrey, this kind of pushes me, like, that guy is really funny, like, and the facial expressions that he makes, like, I don't think I could actually make those facial expressions even with a lot of work. Like, there's something there, but we, again, don't really see what happened in the years and years before he got famous and all the work that he did in order to get there. And again, these are my boys. This is Weber is the taller one, and Tyler is the little guy. This is actually a few years ago now, but I like to use this as an example because, like I said, this is a personal journey that we all take. Weber and Tyler could not be more different. Weber, at the age of 2, had like 300 words in his vocabulary. He was just like off the charts. He's still like, he'll be like playing something, and I'll give him like a 4-line directions, and I'll say, are you even listening to me? And then he'll repeat word for word every single thing that I just said when I didn't think he was listening. Like, he has that kind of brain capacity. Tyler, when he was little, I would say, what's a sheep say? And he'd say, moo. I'd say, no, a cow says moo, a sheep says ba. What's a cow say? And he'd go, ba. I'm like, no, not quite getting it. And so if there's ever like evidence, like these, same 2 parents, but these kids are very, very different. And for me to think that, there isn't something that's fixed in them is crazy. Like, they're very, very, very different. But then after I read her book and thinking about it, like, Tyler's the second child. Like, we did not read to him as much as we read to Weber at all, or even pay attention to him. He's very independent, and he's very creative. He'll get home from school and just go off, and I'll like go in there and he'll be like mumbling to himself, and like he's in this world that some of it must have been created because he was the second child. Like, there's just a different experience that second children have. And so, and Tyler can read now. He's in kindergarten, and he will not probably get to that quite that level that Weber's at, but he can, and he has other interests, and we're pushing in other ways. But the way that we talk to them now is much more kind of letting them know that they can do whatever they want and they can get better at anything that they want to. So that's kind of a look at kind of the history and what's inside us because of our culture. But in the late 90s, there was a huge change in technology with the invention of the functional MRI, or the magnetic resonance imaging machine, because what this allowed us to do was actually look inside people's brains while they're still alive, which we couldn't do before, and while they're thinking. And they use this in order to study the way that the brain works. And what they can see is that when you do certain tasks, certain nerve cells or neurons are turned on and off in these pathways. That is the way that the messages are sent back and forth. And by looking at the way that these are, they can actually kind of use imaging to light up. So that red in the back is the occipital lobe, which is the vision center. And the side where that blue is the temporal lobe, where the auditory center is. So this person right now is both processing visual and auditory images. And so they study people while they're thinking, they give them tasks, and they look at the way that the brain works, and they've learned a tremendous amount. For instance, for the temporal lobe, people who play music, the temporal lobe is denser than people that don't. So what that means is that this sound area of their brain has grown more neural pathways and more connections between the nerve cells after years of practicing. They actually also studied rats, where they would give them a cage that has all sorts of stimulus, and then also give a different set of rats a cage with just food and water, and then they actually weigh their brains, which I think they have to do by like taking them out of the body. So they don't do this on humans. But the rats that were in the kind of stimulating environment have much denser and heavier brains. So the brains physically change and actually grow stronger and denser through the workout. You can see that in pictures like this. Those are neural connections there. And then after whatever kind of work the brain did, you can see the same kind of basic nerve cells, but all of the pathways in between them are much stronger, and there's many more of them. And so when we talk about that first statement about you can learn new things, but you can't change how intelligent you are, when you learn new things, you make more connections, which makes you smarter. And so learning new things actually does make you smarter. And you know this in your own life. Anything that you do, even something like driving to work, like the first time you drive to your new school, you're going to be focusing on where you have to go and and then, when I drove to work, I can't tell you a single thing about my drive to work this morning. I don't remember a single part of it. I didn't consciously think about it because those neural pathways have been built up over time so that my brain can pretty much do it automatically. And the same is true with math. The same is true with PE or science or language or anything else. One final thing, and there's a picture of this in the handouts as well. This is what sold me. When I read this book, Picture Smarts is my one that I'm fixed. I'm like, I'm left-handed, I always smudge my work anyway, and I'm not artistic, I can't draw anything. And they tell this story, Carol Dweck tells this story where she shows these pictures. This is a woman who did her own self-portrait. This, other than the long hair, looks like how I would draw a self-portrait, very rudimentary. And this same student drew this self-portrait at the end of this art class. I'm going to ask you, it's kind of a loaded question because there's going to be a shocker, but how long was the art class? I'll give you a hint. It was 5 of something. So was it 5 months, 5 weeks, 5 days, 5 years? How long would it take somebody from that capacity to that artistic capacity? Anybody want to venture a guess?
5 hours.
5 hours?
Let's go 5 minutes.
5 minutes? You guys are lowballing me. You're making me look bad. 5 weeks? 5 weeks sounded like, okay, I could believe it. It was a 5-day class. It was a 5-day class. And what the teacher says in the book, she explains that art is not about your hands, it's about your eyes. And as soon as you teach people to see shadows and to understand how the hand can draw shadows, that's where you get a nose that looks more like this because they could draw the shadows in there. And so it's not a physical act, it's a brain, and it happens mostly visually. And so it doesn't take very long for people to pick that up. When I saw that, I was like, okay, I'm going to admit it. My fixed mindset was wrong. And now I know I could be a great artist. I'm not, because it's not a priority of mine. It's not something that I care about, and I'm not willing to dedicate all of the time and the effort and the coaching and feedback and all the things that you would need, taking classes. I'm not willing to do that. But I no longer say I'm not artistic because I can't. I just won't. So maybe you're convinced that this science is real, and that people can actually change, and that the fixed mindset is a myth of the past. But even if you aren't, and many people aren't there yet, what I found most fascinating about Carol Dweck's research is it totally transcends this debate. It basically says it doesn't matter what the reality is. It does not matter whether it's true that you can change your intelligence. What matters is your perception. And the reason why is this self-fulfilling prophecy that this table that Jessica was just talking about, that the way that you act if you have a growth mindset is fundamentally different. I want you to picture your classroom 2 weeks from now. And a student with a fixed mindset in your classroom who's trying to kind of perceive all of the different events that are happening and determine what they mean. Okay, so for example, you ask them to raise their hand and answer a question, and the kid raises his hand and gets the question wrong. So the event is he gets the question wrong. The prism is the fixed mindset, and that kid says, wow, well, I'm not smart, and I just proved to everybody in this classroom that who I am is somebody that's not smart because I missed that question. Somebody with a growth mindset, the same exact thing. They get the question wrong. The filter that they look at that through, the perception is, well, I didn't get that one right. I didn't understand the question, or I just didn't know it yet. But it's not who I am. It's just where I am right now in my progress. So someone with a fixed mindset, given that they believe that any event is evidence about who they are, their goal is to just look smart. Like, I don't want to give other people all this evidence that I'm not smart. So I will not raise my hand unless I'm sure, and I will not take risks, and I will not accept challenges unless I know that I'm there. This is the whole thing about when I said, I tell my kid, you're so smart, you did that so fast. As soon as they don't do something fast, you don't have to say, oh, you're not smart anymore, you can't do it fast. They already heard you say, you're so smart, you did that so fast. So then they just easily translate that to, I didn't do it fast, I'm not smart. Whereas somebody with a growth mindset, their goal is to learn. They know, I didn't get that right, well, I better learn more so I can get it right next time. And they have a totally different perception of all of these events, and it totally impacts their actions. And if you know in your classrooms, the kids that ask questions, the kids that continue to try when they fail, all of those types of things will actually make them better, do better in your classroom. I was the summer school principal this summer, and the number of, we had a lot of kids that were coming back, and many of them were successful the second time around, but I still had teachers saying they just won't try, like they won't do it. If they tried, they'd pass, but they won't try. And so what we're saying is, that's this right here. And if we don't fix this in our kids, they're going to continue to fail, and there's nothing that we can do. But we do have control over this, and we can actually teach them to have more of a growth mindset. So finally, in conclusion, I just want to share this chart that I think really sums up this whole dichotomy. If we want our students to embrace challenges, if we want them to persist in the face of setbacks, if we want them to see that effort is the path to mastery, at Lynbrook, I have worked at Lynbrook in a variety of capacities. I was there one time and I heard this kid say, it broke my heart, said to another kid, you had to study for 2 hours for that test? I only studied for 15 minutes and I got an A. Okay, that is a fixed mindset belief in a very high achieving student, but they still believe that their ability is what's carrying them through, and that if you have to put in effort, that's because you're not gifted. That kid is going to struggle when they get to college, because people that do really well in high school that don't develop the systems and the beliefs that they need, as soon as they're not the smartest kid in the room, they all of a sudden like, oh, I thought I was smart, I'm dumb, I can't do it, and they give up. And so even the high-achieving kids in our schools need this messaging because it has a huge impact on them later. Criticism. This I actually see much more in our teaching core than in our students. Teachers that have a fixed mindset aren't very good at hearing criticism about their teaching, and we can, we hire you. Part of the, I don't know if you remember the interview process, but part of our interview process is looking for these aspects in our teachers. We don't want perfect teachers. We want teachers that are ready to grow, and we want teachers that are ready to hear the feedback to make them grow. And I think we live that ourselves as well. The reason I like my mentor team so much is because they push me, and when I screw up, they let me know, and they're not afraid to because they know I want to hear it. And then finally, success of others. When a kid gets an A in the class, the growth mindset kids are wondering what that kid did and asking to study with them so that they can learn more. And the kids with the fixed mindset are just bitter, and they feel threatened by that kid. And so if a kid leaves our district and they have these growth mindset beliefs, even if they didn't learn every single fact and didn't develop every single skill, they're set for life, right? And even if they got straight A's all the way through, but they still exhibit these beliefs on the right-hand column, they're going to struggle. And so this is at the foundation of everything that we do, and it's really the most important thing that all of our teachers are doing in all of the classrooms. Okay, so I'm going to just have you take a little bit of a break as a transition. What I want you to do is just stand up. You can get some coffee or whatever else you want or stretch, but I want you to talk to at least one other person. And I want you to start to predict, what is it that we can do as teachers to change this brick thinking into a growth mindset? So what can we do as teachers to help our students to make this transition to a growth mindset? I'll give you about 5 minutes for this break, and then we'll get started again. Okay.